All right. Good morning, Lauren. How are you?
Hi, David. I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. Now, it's
Excellent.
been it's been a while since we got around to do one of these. We've
Yeah.
been crazy busy, and that's a function of the great things we're doing at Disability Housing Solutions. And we
Yeah.
wanted to talk about just the changes in the SDA market because there's been a whole bunch just this year. It's been a breakneck, crazy paced, hair blown back changes to the market, and the landscape's really different than it was even just in January.
It is.
What do you think? Where would you like to start talking about all this, mate? What do you think?
Look, there is a lot to unpack. So firstly, I appreciate, the opportunity to keep chatting through these things. And I hope it's really helpful for everyone just to have an extra perspective and a little bit more information. And of course, we're showing it in a way that helps people see inside, the SDA market. But look, I guess the two biggest markers that are a hot topic in the industry at the moment are two particular SDA providers that have just been through some shutdowns and a liquidation with the NDAS. So one being Cocoon SDA Care, I believe is their name, and NDISP liquidating and transitioning to a different SDA provider. So look, there's been a lot of rhetoric around why and what went wrong, and what's been done badly, and what people should be doing, or what SDA providers really should be, implementing as best practice to avoid this in the future. And I think that's something that's really important to understand is what actually happened, because the media is one side of the story. There's some other intricacies that I think are very important to note. And what do you need to look for in an SDA provider that perhaps will mitigate some of those risks?
It's such, we're trying to keep these podcasts to sort of 20, 30 minutes, but it's just what you've said there. We could talk about that all day long.
Yeah.
And the more that any of us do in this SDA space, the more we realise how multi-layered it is, and how there's a propensity for people to try and oversimplify it. And an example of that would be marketing agents who go and sell SDA property to mums and dads, and they try and really boil it down, really distill it to two or three areas, and it's
Mm.
impossible to work like that with SDA.
Yeah.
They'll say something like, "Hey, you build a house in this suburb, and the government backs you with rent for 120 grand or whatever," and they're not strictly lying, but they're
Mm.
they're certainly not painting the full picture about the risks, and that they're not filling in the gaps at all with statements like that. And it's
Yeah.
similarly with the media and with Cocoon and NDISP. I can kind of get parts of it, yeah, and then there's gaps about what's not being said, and
That's
that's a
right.
big conversation. Now
It
we were
is.
just discussing off camera that there's been rumblings around some SDA providers, and there's still rumblings still around some other SDA providers who are still solvent.
Mm. Mm.
And as an owner, as a landlord who's looking, or an investment group, or a developer who's looking to bring SDAs online, it's so easy to get caught up in a good pitch by an
Yeah.
SDA provider, and we see it.
Yeah.
And I could name a couple, but there's some really good elevator pitches out there, and there's some really good front-facing websites that go, "Hey, these guys look amazing,"
Mm.
and then when
Mm.
you get into it, and the T's and C's start to come up, or the delays in filling property, and the slowness of tenant procurement. Some SDA
Mm.
providers don't lift a finger in tenant procurement, and they rely on the support agencies to do that for them.
Yeah.
It's a very nuanced market,
Yeah.
and so to try and boil it all down to two or three talking points is really incomplete.
It is. So when we chatted earlier, just about the 3 points that this might highlight for people to be aware of for next time, or to sort of really make sure that they're considering before choosing an investment or B, a provider. One of the biggest things, and we've talked about this before, is the real importance there of the separation of SIL and housing. Now, this was a review recommendation made in 2023, and those recommendations are due to be implemented during this year. So what that's doing is really encouraging still providers that have got a housing portfolio to separate out that housing portfolio and only provide supports, or vice versa, whichever way their
Yeah.
business strategy takes them. The interesting thing with Cocoon is that they were sort of intertwined. So they had the SDA housing component where they were selling, building, and managing housing, as well as providing care in that housing through
Yeah.
SDA Cocoon Care or whatever it was called. So
Yeah.
there was that clear enmeshment of
That's right.
housing support and the development. So it was this whole pipeline there that really
In the
tied.
old speak, you'd say they were vertically integrated, and
Yeah.
that's precisely what the agency's trying to now untangle.
Yes, and
And I
that
think there's been this attitude in the market that the NDIA, NDS is this toothless tiger. I think that's been the attitude. It's like, oh no, they'll be okay, we won't. And then this cocoon thing, I think it's one of the first times that the market's really seen some teeth with the
yeah.
agency.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that from an investor perspective, they were promised head lease amounts from Cocoon, but there were some really tricky terms and conditions in there that meant that quite often that didn't come to fruition. So investors have been told this beautiful story with these beautiful financial outcomes, and quite often that hasn't been the case. Somewhere along the line, the NDIS has decided that there's some problems here with the claiming. So the SDA claiming that Cocoon were putting into the NDIS for payment was so far behind
Yeah,
that Cocoon ended up millions, hundreds of millions of dollars behind in claims for owners for SDA payments that should have been paid. So that sort of paints a bit of a picture like, okay,
I understand as well as support payments as well because they're vertically
yeah,
integrated. They're also
yeah,
missing. So
there
it's
would
not
have been
just the
both.
housing component. There was
No,
so that hundreds of millions racked up with payments to out of the participants' plan for the hours worked in the house, right? So there was a lot there, and we should really say this is not unique to Cocoon. We experience this. We
yes, yes, we
experience
actually
if
do on
if
a
if
smaller
there's
level.
yeah, but the smallest change to a plan, it raises a flag somewhere in the computers at the NDIS and payments stop, right? And it
Yep,
can take 90 days, 120 days, like to work through that. And in the
yep,
meantime, there's no money coming through.
that's
Now, if
right.
you've got half of your portfolio that's been meddled with and plan changes and all of a sudden the tap turned off, as a business, that impact to cash flow can be catastrophic. It can really, and that can end a business.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that's got a lot to do with why their support staff weren't paid and their superannuation wasn't paid and their
Mm.
ATO wasn't paid. So I believe as a business, they were supporting each other with the vertical integration, but the NDIS pausing their payments and them not being able to overcome that issue
Yeah.
by providing the evidence or the request for information that the NDIS would have asked for to justify those claims, it's become bigger than Ben-Hur. So as much
'Cause at a
as,
certain point, I mean, if you've got accommodation and supports and a couple of other things happening, and they've all got requests for information from an agency, and these are RFIs, it's not an email with a couple of sentences. They're
no,
detailed. You've got to get chase documents and chase stakeholders, and if you're now dealing with a couple of hundred of these, your business is just buried under an avalanche of
that's,
of paperwork that you
yeah,
just can't dig your way out of. And
yeah,
and
yeah,
part of the problem, and I think some of the more nuanced conversations that I'm seeing out there after the Cocoon and NDISP respective collapses, there's the stuff in the media that, like, again, we can kind of see that point of it,
mm,
and it's like, hang on, we're all dealing with this bureaucratic behemoth
yes,
that every day it gets harder, not easier.
yeah.
And there's more red tape, not less, day by day by day, and it compounds. It's
Yes,
not like
absolutely.
they don't introduce one bit of paperwork or compliance that you now need and remove another one. It just it compounds.
It's really got, I mean, and I'm speaking from DHS's experience with similar, like payment delays and plan monies not being correct and, previous SDA budgets being overclaimed and all sorts of intricacies that basically make claiming difficult and delayed. So within DHS, we've got a handful of those, and the resources that we have to equip to actually chasing those things is often got to
Wow.
do with NDIS's internal administration system being clunky, no accountability,
Yeah.
no sort of set person that's really following that through unless you escalate and really be a squeaky wheel, which, of course, at some point we've got to do because we've got owners to answer to. But it really has got a lot to do with, like you said, the bureaucracy, red tape, and administration of the NDIS's claiming system is really difficult and very, how do you say, not transparent. We can't see in, and so therefore we're
Yeah, it's a black hole.
blind.
It's a black
Yeah,
hole of faceless bureaucrats, and there's no individual names and contact numbers for people who own. There's no one owns the challenge that you're dealing with, right?
that's it. Yeah. So from a small provider level, we can see that that would have been really problematic, and it's something that you sort of chase, thinking, okay, we'll get an answer. There will be an outcome because we're doing the right thing. But it's the time it takes and the resource drain on
Yeah.
that.
What do you think? I mean, Cocoon wasn't. Again, it's not a small operation. It's a big operation, and we're dealing with this internally at DHS. But how do we comply with all of this stuff? How do we get through it? And it's clear to us that we can't keep throwing people at problems because it's just way too expensive.
Mm.
Every time that the scope of the bureaucracy expands and the requirements expand, well, we need to deal with it. So do we hire someone to deal with it and start? And like, it's just
Yeah,
again, it comes back to a business decision, and it's just not affordable. So then, how do we do it? Now, I'm quite certain that if you go around the country, smaller providers who struggle with how to respond to this expansion of the compliance requirements,
no.
they're going to go under. There's no question for me that we're going to see SDA provided, and there's an audit coming. We're expecting our audit any day. Now we're pretty good at that. We're always kind of audit ready because we have those systems in place. We've been around long enough to know that if you're not ready at all times, you're going to hurt. But a lot of providers aren't prepared like that, or they don't have the horsepower to throw at an audit or the
Yeah,
daily compliance. And as it
yeah,
gets more, not less, I think you're going to see providers with 20, 40, 60 participants. All of a sudden they go, we're done. And overnight, you saw how quickly NDISP went from trade to not trade.
yeah,
And then all those people had to go somewhere.
yeah.
We're talking with some stakeholders now about one of these organisations that went under. Their participants were just moved to a hospital because there's no alternate options. So now
Oh,
they've gone from
yeah.
being in the home to being in hospital.
Yeah, and from an owner's perspective, they haven't been paid any income, and they've had tenants. I spoke to one owner last week who'd had tenants for 18 months and
That's
only been
tough.
paid 3 or 4 months worth of income. And so it was a desperate financial situation for
Yeah.
them where they couldn't get any money remitted for the tenants that are there, and so that they had to basically say, "I'm really sorry, you've got to move out." And it was the demise of it all that brought it all to a head. So these owners have been hanging on and trying to do the
Yeah.
right thing. And unfortunately, it did result in, admission to hospital as their best
We,
housing
we we
option.
need to give a shout out to the owners. I think some of these
I
owners,
know.
they're generous beyond generous.
Yeah.
If you had a standard apartment or a house in a normal residential, and your tenant hasn't paid rent for 12 months, you'd be in front of QCAT or VCAT, or you'd have them out on the street within weeks, not
Yeah.
if not right. But
Yeah.
these owners, they hang on and they're
Yeah.
trying to do the right
And to
thing.
try
But
to
at
do
some
the right
point, it's
thing.
a choice between them losing their family home and their family breaking down.
Yep. Yeah. So
They're
there's
tremendous.
yeah, there's been a lot of trauma there for the owners as well as the tenants. And what I mean, your comment before about how as an organisation can we manage that, knowing that it's difficult to claim with the NDIS and you've got to be really prepared. And it really is about investing in best practice and proactive management of those issues, because we know that the NDIS is not necessarily going to be uncomplicated for our benefit. So it's about identifying how can we do better each time to make sure that our claims are ready to be put in, that we have as much transparency before a service agreement is set up and lodged, and to make sure that those initial markers are all ticked off and qualified before lodging a service agreement so that things go smoothly. But it's a big resource drain. And so from that perspective of the cocoon situation, I understand how that would have impacted them as a business. But then you've got to layer on, the claims of fraudulent claiming,
Yeah,
and support's not.
there's that. There is that.
There's that.
There is-
There's that. So I
there-
can't relate to that.
yeah, look, we're
But
not gonna step over that or pretend
no,
it's not happening. It certainly, again, and I disclaim this with I have no bloody idea, but it's certainly on face value from what we've been presented, it does look like some shenanigans. It really does.
absolutely, absolutely. There's no way there's not things there that absolutely had to come undone, and it's for the better of the community that they have. Now, NDISP is a different sort of a circumstance whereby they've been put into liquidation, and that is because of a very large outstanding ATO bill. So the ASIC has actually put them into liquidation to try.
Yeah, so that's right. For you watching that, there's different things. Cocoon was shut down by the NDIS, and NDISP shut down by the tax office. Now, we understand NDISP facing some of these similar challenges, the delays in payments and millions of dollars stacking up in unpaid claims due to, and look, you have to acknowledge that a lot of the delays in this, it's NDIS related.
Yeah,
They're absolutely, they can be slow, difficult, really hard to get through that massive compliance.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And look, I think it is important to note there with NDISP that so what seems to have happened, and I'm speculating here, I haven't spoken to the owners at Sigma there now, but the transition of owners from one SDA provider to the other seems to have been, a purchase by the liquidator of the rental book. So what my concern for investors again here is that they weren't given a choice to opt to a provider of their choosing, and that a lot of the difficulty that we experience for owners wanting to change providers is a very, very lengthy locked-in contract where even if they are
Yeah.
unhappy with the service, they're unable to get out of that contract and choose another provider.
I'm
So
glad you touched on this because
yeah,
this is something that certainly irritates me. I know of a couple of providers who have 20-year service agreements, right? Now I'm not personally. Me personally, I think that's too long to try and lock in one person with one organisation. But the ones I know about, at least they have performance clauses,
yeah,
which mean if your provider doesn't perform to a certain standard, you can exit that service agreement.
that's right.
Others lock you in with no performance clauses. You're just locked in. So if they don't perform, you're still locked in, and you've kind of got to go and talk to the lawyers to get out of it. Now we've dealt with a couple of these where owners have lawyered up. And on the threat of now having to go to court, the provider will release them because ultimately that kind of locked-in term is not in good faith, you would
Yeah,
say. And I think they can start to prove that, and it's going to be expensive for everyone. So they kind of really, but you've got to go legal, which is
but
challenging for landlords.
yeah,
So
proven path. Yeah,
when you said owners have a choice, it's really important. Like, if you're with a provider, and I'm not talking about any ISP, it could be anyone, because there's going to be more of this happen. There's going to be more providers go under. If you're with a provider and they go under and they say, hey, you should now go and put your property with XYZ provider management, you don't need to do, you can choose at any point as an owner, you should be able to say, you know what, no, I have choice and control just as much as the participant. I choose ABC, not XYZ. Thank you very much. And you can do that.
yeah,
And to help facilitate that, DHS has been offering free provider switches. We used to charge a fee for service to migrate an owner from another provider to us. but it's becoming such a problem. We've waived all those fees, and we're now bringing in owners at no charge. If you have an enrolled and tenanted property, you can
Mm.
come across to us, and we don't lock you in for 20 years. That's goofy,
Well,
and
look,
it's not commercial.
we've always seen the SDA industry as a real estate industry, and for us, like I've got health experience, I've got real estate experience, and I've got disability experience combined. So knowing how, as a customer, I integrate with the real estate market in regular residential, I'm able to swap providers from Ray White to LJ Hooker to Remax
Sure,
to whatever.
it doesn't cost you a cent, right?
If something's not working. So we've structured our agreements in a similar sort of a format. It's a rolling renewable lease that passes rent through to owners. And if there's any reason there that they sort of think, you know what, you guys aren't for us or we're not for you, sure, let us know in writing and we'll switch everything over. And we do absolutely everything we can to make that a smooth transition to whichever
That's right.
agent going
Yeah.
to. And I just think that the SDA market needs to understand that's best practice. That keeps us accountable for doing a good job,
Yes.
and keeps flexibility for when we sort of go, you know what, this owner and us, we're on very different pages. We're not the right fit. We can let each other go, but it really does make sure that the market is balancing itself out and allowing that choice and control for owners as well as providers to opt out when it's not the
Yeah.
right fit. So I think it's really important. And I would encourage other SDA providers to adopt a similar model because I think it just allows for flexibility and transparency and accountability. What could go wrong?
I mean, and it's really hard to argue against that. It's really hard to argue that as providers, it's hard to argue we shouldn't be held accountable to high standards and delivering what we say we're going to deliver. And if we don't, we should be punished by the customer going to someone else.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's commerce. That's what business is. And
That is-
fundamentally, business is all about relationships.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
sometimes, we've had owners where we don't gel.
Yeah. And that's
It
okay.
happens. And we've had owners come from other providers who are like long lost family, and they're like, oh, you're our people,
Yeah.
and it's all good either way.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you're right. We have seen a couple of immature responses from providers when people come across to us. But it should just be, when we lose a landlord, it's like, we're sorry to see you go, and we'll make as easy as we can this transition to a new provider.
Yeah.
Provide everything we can as quickly as we can, as professionally as we can.
Yeah, yeah. So it's really important to note, yeah, but with the transition from NDISP to I think it's Sigma, um, yeah, I don't know how all those owners are going with that, and it's just really important that they understand what their options are.
I really hope Sigma hasn't just copy and pasted the service agreements from NDISP. I really hope they haven't. Um,
Yeah, I would be very surprised. I think that they have got a very reputable human in Sigma, someone who I've worked closely with before, and I think he'd be doing everything he can to make that a good transition. However, I still believe that owners should have had a choice. So,
yeah, again, it's hard to argue that position. It's hard to argue that people shouldn't have a choice. I want to touch on the amount of property that, at least at DHS, that we're seeing come on that we would classify as tier 3 property. And it's kind of the tail end of all of the marketing stock that's coming through the system prior to the lending changes late last year. So again, just to recap for those who have forgotten or may not know, sort of late 2024, some of the primary lenders in the SDA space, they changed their parameters around how they'd lend money to SDAs. And look, there's a lot of different changes, but the impact was about 90% of applications started getting knocked back, something
yeah,
like that.
yeah,
And because they realised that a lot of the money that they were deploying into the market were for these outer suburban SDAs that the marketing agents had made all these grandiose promises for that were not being filled and had resulted in severe oversupplies in certain areas. So that
yeah,
all stopped late last year.
yeah,
But
yeah,
there were hundreds already in the pipeline coming through. And we've seen those that the tail end of that, like I said, come through. And we've had a lot of SDA properties land on our books. The challenging, would be a
Yeah,
word you'd use to describe
yeah,
their position and what they are.
yeah, yeah.
Now we have very frank and fearless conversations with landlords when they join us. If we think your property's in a challenging spot, we let you know from the
Mm,
first conversation that your
absolutely.
property's in a challenging spot, and it's only
Yeah.
fair and reasonable to do that. And we lay out a list of options, and
Well,
we try and reset expectations. They've,
mm,
they've been told by the marketer, hey, you're going to have 3 tenants within 6 months and make all this money. So listen, we know this suburb intimately, and it's unlikely you'll have even one tenant in the next 12 months. And we
mm,
have those kind of conversations, and we
yeah,
provide a list of options that owners can go through.
yeah,
And as an owner who may have invested more than they maybe should have on the promise that they're going to make these fantastic returns, that's a very difficult conversation to be a part of. And whilst they can sort of accept that in the first few months, after sort of 6 months, what we've seen at least is some owners can tend to forget that it's they got themselves into this situation in the first place, not us, and we're doing the best we can to get them out of it. And
mm.
there's a bit of angst out
Yeah,
there.
absolutely, and fair enough. Our team's very good at sort of getting into a market and generating inquiry where there's inquiry to be had.
Yeah,
But sometimes it is just a very flooded sort of a picture. And the latest quarterly report came out a little while ago, and it's in line with what we're experiencing. So it is sort of suggesting that there's a roughly a 42% vacancy rate across the country. Now
that's right.
that points directly to the completion of all of those spruiker pockets that have been coming to completion and being enrolled and sitting vacant. So it really does highlight to the market that exactly what we've been talking about for some time is rolling out. But the interesting thing is that since those finance changes last year, a lot of that stock, like you said before, 90%, I would suggest it's maybe closer to 95%, has come to quite a complete stop. So the stock that we're seeing on the market now, yes, might feel like an oversupply pocket in lots of different regions, but we don't feel like there's going to be any more tipped into those areas.
Yes,
So it is just a matter of time.
for that to
So
catch up.
yeah, yeah. So a lot of the conversations we're having with those owners that are in those pockets is, hey, look, it's likely to take this amount of time, and these are the risks associated. This is the kind of alternative options you might want to look at. If you're happy to really give it a go and let us get stuck into it and wait, there's a possibility that this would be your outcome. But the market's going to look very different in 12 to 18 months
I
when
think
that,
you're right. It's like a concertina that the market really it got away from itself,
yeah,
and
yeah.
then it stopped, and now it's gonna just catch
Gonna
up
catch
because
back
the
up.
front end stopped. Right, you're
Yep.
right. I think, and then we're working with some community housing providers that represent at least in Queensland the housing department for social housing.
Mm,
And one of the options we're trying to explore is these would make great social homes. Some of these property because of their SDA homes, they're amazing. They're built to a higher spec than any social home will ever be built.
yeah.
But the department's just not real in expectations about. I've met with the new housing minister personally and had these conversations in his ministerial offices in the city,
Mm, mm.
and they're just not real about
They're
putting
different,
the
different
appropriate
numbers.
amount of money to solve the problem.
Yes, yeah, it's a very different scheme. A social and affordable housing, in terms of financial outlay, doesn't compare to SDA
Yeah,
housing responsibility for the government. So
that's
it is a hard bridge to cross. But for us, we see built product that's vacant and a housing
40,
need. It's not a
42%
drag.
vacancy, right? That's thousands of homes around the country that are sitting, getting cobwebs on them. And
Yeah,
and what's the social housing wait list in Queensland? 47,000, right? And there's out of that 42%, there's a lot in Queensland, and we
yeah.
know of quite a few.
Yeah, yeah. Look, I think there'd be pockets in every state, but yeah, the important thing is there to sort of recognise, okay, if you can't wait that time, it's likely to take in an supplied area for, let's say, the next 18 months. and you just want a solution that's going to pay the mortgage, then have a look at these alternative options, because there absolutely is a housing need out there that will pay you some rent.
Yeah,
It's just a matter of waiting for the market to level out. And again, coming back to regular real estate market, the market will balance out over time.
it
So,
does.
yeah, it's I think the next 12 to 18 months, maybe 2 years, is likely to be quite difficult in those oversupplied pockets still. And then it will level out and be a different picture. But I mean, and I wanted to share a good story with everybody. We are always looking at these stats of, okay, where are our highest risks in our portfolio and where do we need to pour extra resources in to really get some traction? Now, we're in Queensland, in the Brisbane to Gold Coast corridor. I think everyone knows the oversupply in, say, Ipswich, for example. And we've recently placed a couple of tenants in Ipswich. In fact, I think we placed 12 tenants last month. So
Yeah, we
we
did.
found suitable homes that people loved,
Yeah,
that
look,
they
we're having record months at DHS. We're having month after month after month are record months. We're placing
yeah.
12 tenants in 1 month from SDA providers. A lot.
It's a
It's a
lot,
lot.
and it goes to show, yes, some of them are what we call a tier one location, where we feel that there's demand and it's a good property type and the location's really great. And so those properties go a lot faster, but we're also having some rolling, sort of slower but successful outcomes in those outer reach areas. So it is a matter of time. And I cross my fingers that owners can hang on for that SDA outcome, and where they can't, ride it out for a year or two and then come back and have a look at it again.
Yeah. Well, that's about half an hour. That doesn't the time fly? And we're about to have a meeting at the Gold Coast, so I need to get my skates on and get in the car. So I need to get out of here.
Okay, all right,
Right.
excellent.
So
Well,
look,
thanks
that
for
was a
your
fairly
time.
wide-ranging chat. Next week, we're hoping to have a special guest. No teasers. But we really want to get into this separation of services between SILS and SDA. So we're hoping to have a very really high-powered, knowledgeable guest next week, and when we do, you'll know when we know. I suppose
That's
we'll
right.
have her on.
Keep you hanging.
All right. Thanks, Lauren. Great
Yeah,
catch
no
up.
worries. Thanks, Dave. Lovely to chat to you.
See ya. Bye.
Bye.